but the victim impact statements were unbelievable. And so we reached out and wanted to get Mr. Leander James to join us, and he does now. He is the family attorney for Maddie Mogen, and he's also, very importantly, part of a program, a process, an organization called Made with Kindness, the Made with Kindness Foundation. Mr. James, thank you for being here. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
And your words on the courthouse steps there were eloquent, appropriate, heartfelt, heartbreaking. How has this process been for you?
It's been difficult. I've been working on this case for more than 2 years on behalf of Karen Laramie and Scott Laramie, the mother and stepfather of Maddie, and in victim crime victim cases like this, particularly, what you're dealing with, in my view, as an attorney, is not just the legal process and explaining the legal process to the clients to help them navigate it, but also you're helping them work through the sort of the arc of recovery to the extent they can recover from the trauma. And it's my view, in the work that I do a lot of crime victim rights work on behalf of all kinds of victims, sexual assault victims all the way to murder victims and families, as we have here. And the challenge is to help them navigate this system that is relatively emotionless in a way. I mean, the system's a system. And then to help them with their emotional recovery using the legal process as best you can to do that. So it's been challenging. It's been difficult at times. I'll tell you that, for example, in the change of plea hearing, that was a very difficult hearing for the clients and me. I mean, my focus is really not on me, it's on the clients, so you'll hear me talk about them. It sort of set them back because it was so sudden, I think, and because there was really no closure, right? And you heard them in open court confess to murdering their child. I mean, that's awfully brutal. I'm pleased to say, though, I think the sentencing hearing was helpful because it brought a sense of closure when Judge Hippler read the sentencing and he went out the door and it shut behind him. Something about that was quite symbolic, I think, for my clients, and it was helpful to them. So the answer to your question, has been really challenging. I think we've made a lot of progress, and we're still it's still ongoing post the sentencing because of obviously the media and other things that we have to navigate.
Yeah. Attorney James, let me ask you a question, because I came from a family that when I was young growing up, we had a cousin of mine who was kidnapped and she was killed by a serial killer, never found. But the media wasn't what it was then as it is now. They actually tried to help, right? And have people recover. I couldn't believe, maybe I could believe it, maybe that's what shocked me so much, the attacks on some of the victims here. How do you prepare, first of all, how do you respond to that? And how do you prepare your clients for ignoring that or challenging it? I'm not sure how you navigate that.
Well, one of the things you do is you help to keep, in this case, mother and stepfather focused on their healing process and what is helpful to them. So whether or not, well, for example, you mentioned the Made with Kindness Foundation. That has been an important aspect, I think, of Karen's healing process. And I'll put in a plug here. Anybody who wants to join her in that process can donate to Made with Kindness Foundation at madewithkindnessfoundation.com. But to answer your question, you keep them focused on their healing process. And with respect to the press specifically, there are strategies I employ in high-profile cases like this to help the clients. Okay, number one is you try to give one interview that's fairly comprehensive that can be accessed by media and others, so they don't have to keep telling their story over and over. That's number one. Now, we did that when Karen and Scott did give an interview about a year ago to the Amazon documentary One Night in Idaho, and Matthew Galkin was the director of that, and he handled it, we thought, very appropriately, and that was one of the things we wanted to assure that we handled appropriately. So you have them give one statement to avoid multiple statements. You have their attorney run interference, which is partly what I'm doing here. I've been asked by them to speak on their behalf, and part of that is to keep the press from getting after them. And I sort of am a shield for them. And then as at this point, they haven't foreclosed other giving other interviews, but I can help them pick and choose what they want to do and when they want to do it. And why would they do it? Why do victims like this give interviews or speak out? There's really a couple of things that happen. You'll see in the themes here, and which is helpful in dealing with the media. And one is, messaging. You'll see in Scott and Karen's victim impact statements and their statements to the press, there's a consistent theme of trying to move on and of hope and healing. Now, I'm not going to be Pollyannish. It may be impossible to totally heal from a harm like this, but but dwelling in it and becoming angry and so forth generally is not helpful, I find, to the crime victim. So it is helpful for them to show others that you can move through these crises and move on, and they hope that they're an example for other parents who are suffering, who can find strength in their strength, and they have a lot of strength. And so there's messaging you can help in the press and help navigate that with the clients. When they're not represented, the problem is you end up like the poor roommates here, for example, and others who were maligned in the press and in the dark press, I call it, in the blogs. And you folks know better than me, but it was really heartbreaking to hear their statements, right, when they covered that territory and talked about how they were devastated by the horrible treatment they were given by people who were so insensitive on the internet. So hopefully I answered your question. Sorry for being long-winded, but yeah.
No. I think it's fascinating because that's one of the things. I went after people harshly who went after the roommates. I mean, how can you?
Outrageous.
Right. It's Michael Bryan could probably speak a bit about it. It was outrageous. It was maddening. As a parent, as a person, as a lawyer, how can you? You weren't in that position. I mean, many of us felt fear after this, and we weren't even victims at that house. I mean, so I don't understand that kind of damage, and I give you that people want to do, and I give you great credit for helping the families. I really do.
Leander, let me ask you this, and you mentioned how the plea kind of came together quickly, and that process, how involved, if at all, were the families?
Well, I'll start out by saying, generally speaking, to be quite honest, keep in mind the criminal process is run by the prosecutor who works for the people of the state, or in the federal system for the United States. And their focus is on serving the people of the state, not the victims necessarily. And that always creates a little bit of a tension when I work in these cases, because the prosecutor is focused on a lot, resources, how to navigate through the case to get the best plea agreement or conviction. And now in this case, I'm pleased to say that the prosecutor and the victim right coordinators that work for the prosecutor were very helpful with us, very engaged with us. It was a good process for my clients as best it can be. They interacted with us regularly. And when it came to the plea agreement, we were surely consulted and felt we were a part of that process and integrated into it. And as you know, from the statement, if you saw it, that Karen and Scott fully, as they said, 100% agree with the plea agreement. And for good reasons we can get into if you want, but there's very good reasons why that plea agreement was the right way to go. Yeah,
please explain. What was their thought process, as you understand?
Well, the death row is sort of a misnomer. You might as well call it life row, because it takes so long for, if ever, for the death sentence to be implemented. So think of the stages here you have to go through, okay? The first stage would be a trial with 12 jurors in Idaho who have to unanimously convict him beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, there are what I call crazies out there, and all you have to do is go look at some of the blogs, and you'll see that there's conspiracy theories. There's all kinds of wacko theories about what was going on with this defendant. Maybe he wasn't the one who did it. You get someone like that on the jury, and you've got a real problem. Okay, that's a real risk. So I mean, heaven forbid he gets acquitted, right? And then and I think people who sort of were critical and said we should have gone for the death penalty overlook a lot of things like that. The second thing I think they overlook is the fact that if you get a conviction, it goes into the second phase, the sentencing phase, and you need a unanimous jury. to impose the death sentence. Now imagine if you had someone on the first jury, on the jury, who doesn't believe in the death sentence. Maybe they want to acquit him because they just don't believe in the death sentence. They don't want that to be at issue. Or in the second phase, they won't impose the death sentence. So you end up with life in prison or something like that anyway. And then let's just assume you achieve everything and you get the death sentence entered. The average time that the defendant has been sitting, as of like the statistic was 2014, in Idaho on death row is 12 years. But look at Thomas Creech. He's been on death row since January 1983. Okay, and there's no death sentence been imposed. In fact, I think it was converted to life. But the problem is then you have the post-conviction relief process, which people don't often think about, which is prior to appeals, and then you have appeals. And so for years you have these appeals, and during the appeals you're going to have, and I'm not taking a stand on the death penalty either way here. I'm just telling you that when you have these appeals, now you have a well-heeled outfit that is a nonprofit outfit that comes in and they advocate for the criminal defendant. And they have excellent attorneys typically. And we all know, these outfits are out there. These nonprofits are out there and they're doing what they think is right. And it's a moral campaign for them. So whether the guy is the devil incarnate or not doesn't matter to them. Their job is to do away with the death penalty. And we're in the Ninth Circuit in Idaho. Okay. And on top of that, the Supreme Court, or not the Supreme Court, the legislature of Idaho in 2025, March of 25, passed a bill that the primary method of execution in Idaho is by firing squad. Now imagine going up in front of the Ninth Circuit trying to argue that firing squad is not cruel and usual punishment. So what I'm illustrating are all of these potential roadblocks to ever getting the death sentence implemented. Now go back to my clients. What is their process during all of this? Every time this issue is raised again and again and again and again, it rips open that wound and there's no healing and there's no moving on. So in the end of the day, it was the right thing to do. The prosecutor here, Bill, did the right thing.
It re-traumatizes and re-traumatizes and re-traumatizes and re-traumatizes. And I assume that your clients were also concerned about the roommates too, who would, the one roommate, to me looked like she was this far away from, I don't know, just collapsing in the courtroom. I mean,
oh, it's tragic. Yeah, you heard her story. I mean, you're both of them. I mean, they went home, locked doors like for a year or more, and wouldn't go out. They were afraid that people had maligned them and so forth. I think one of the things that happened, I took one of our interns to the sentencing hearing, and it was interesting to see her. Hear her comment. Now she's going to school at the University of Idaho. She's been following this case for the past 2 years, and I brought her on the inside of the case. She met the clients and she went to the hearing, and she made this comment I thought was fairly profound, and it was that, when I was listening to this case in the media and I was watching it, following it, it was sort of this abstract, really interesting case that made me very interested, and I followed it. But when I came on the inside and saw it through our client's eyes, it totally changed for me. And I saw this from the inside and how real it is. And that triggered an empathic response on her part to understand. And what I'm trying to illustrate, I think some of these bloggers and so forth, and people who are feeding off of and even the comments you see, people who make comments online, they're looking at it abstractly from the outside, not realizing that these are real people going through tragic and horrible situations. As you said about the kidnapping situation, I'm sure it was enormously painful in your family. And when you see it from the inside and you get it. A lot of people don't these days, and the media and the internet have made it worse.
Yeah, there's no doubt in the true crime world, people are desensitized. They're watching these stories all the time, watching them unfold. And I will admit, having covered them from both inside and out, you sometimes have to steel yourself, or you'll just not survive. Because these stories are so strong, so powerful, so emotional. You have to kind of erect sort of a barrier, but you can't forget that the real people involved can't do that. This is their lives and their loved ones. So I get it. I understand how people it's almost like they got a remote control and they're just watching a TV show.
Yeah, I think, your work somewhat is similar to mine in that regard, because you're covering these horrible situations daily, right? I saw your show the other day. You were talking about this horrible shooting in New York. And by the way, I have a bunch of clients in New York. I work in New York. I know exactly where you're talking and it happened.
Right back here, right behind me, 2 blocks.
Yeah, exactly. And I have depositions down there. And what I was getting at is that you hear these horrible stories, and again, I want to focus on my clients, but I will say, from my point of view, and I tell my young attorneys that work with me this, you do have to have some sort of distance or balance, because the stories are so horrific, all the way from the sexual abuse cases I deal with to the murder cases to everything in between. Okay, I have a number of cases, for example, under New York's Child Victims Act, and they're horrible cases, and they invade your mind, and there's a secondary trauma that can occur. So you do have to sort of protect against that, and I think that's true in your work too. But at the same time, you have to balance that with a sense of empathy and understanding of what these people are going through.
How do you prepare? I mean, again, I'm not a victim of Kohberger, okay, but when my husband went out to do some coverage for another network, and I was alone in the house, and I was there, I was seeing his face, and I'm not a victim of him. It just was so horrible for me. So how do you prepare a client to meet someone like that, who has that, to me, that I won't say snake eyes, but that it's like the emptiness, and knowing what he did to not only your child but other people's child. How do you prepare a client for that?
Well, there's some specific things you do, and it does help to have mileage that I've had with deposing and cross-examining and examining criminals. Whether they're a rapist, a murderer, or what have you. And some of the things you can say and help the clients with to prepare is to explain to them that you'll never understand these people. You'll drive yourself crazy trying to understand why they do what they do. And even if you asked them why they did what they did, and Judge Hippler did a good job at this in the sentencing. He said, a lot of people want me to have Mr. Kohberger tell us what his motive was. And Judge Hippler pointed out, I thought it was important. He pointed out, now wait a minute, we have a man here that murdered 4 children. How likely is he to tell you the truth? And by the way, if he tells you what his motive is today, that's what he wants you to think his motive is. And back then. And so when you prepare the clients, you prepare him that everything from the steely stare he's going to have, the insensitivity he's going to have, and just tell him that. This guy doesn't care about you, okay? He doesn't care about any of this. We'll never understand why he did what he did. He whatever, was he a sociopath or whatever it is, I don't know. But, this case is not about him. And that takes me to the next step of it, and that is empowerment. It's really important to help the crime victims understand that you can be empowered in this process. He doesn't own it. You own it now. You're the one who has the power. And you can even just disregard him and move on. I often say that when my clients come to me, they come to me as victims. They've been victimized. When I represent them, my goal is to make them survivors, that they realize they can survive this and move on. And ideally, when I shake their hand at the end of representation and they go on with their life, they're thrivers. They can go on. They may have a huge scar, and they may not be totally healed over, but they're in a better place and they can move on in their lives. And that's really the ultimate goal. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot of legalese, because it's not. But as I said earlier, you try to use the legal process to help them with that holistic approach and for them to move on.
Yeah, use the word power. It's what I was thinking when you were suggesting that allowing a defendant like this guy to dictate, hey, you guys care so much about what I did, I'm now in power again. I'm now the one who's controlling this information. Yeah, dismiss it. Don't give that to him. But from a legal standpoint, in this plea that we've been talking about, was there ever a discussion that part of the plea deal would be for him to disclose some sort of motive?
Well, I want to be really respectful of the prosecutor here, and I don't want to and I can say it another way. I just don't want to get into, actually what we talked about, but because that I need to be very respectful and honor that. But I can tell you the answer in another way. It's my view that, as I said, and Judge Hippler said, making him state a motive or why he did this or give the details about what happened, I don't think that's helpful for a couple of reasons. One is, who knows if he's telling the truth? You're never going to know. And I have deposed, as I said, I have examined under oath and had to ask these questions of perpetrators. Why did you do it, for example? The answer you get raises about another 20 or 30 questions. It doesn't end. And you have more and more questions, and it continues to rip open the wound more and more. For example, do we really need to know how many times he stabbed each kid? I mean, do we really need to know that? Look, he took their lives. They're dead. Okay, we've lost them. It's terrible. Okay, now how do we move from
I wouldn't want my kids' autopsies and the stabbing to be out there in the public. I mean, I like that. I would not. I just throw that in because to me that would be one reason why I would want that plea accepted.
Right. You don't need to get into all this underlying stuff. And even if you do with a perpetrator like this, you're not going to get the truth.
How about the issue I brought up was him disclosing where the knife was, because you're going to have these crazies in the future are going to say he didn't do it because he didn't tell you where the knife was, and the real killer would know where the knife was. Can you talk about that in any way?
Well, there are ways that may have been, forced upon him to have to disclose certain things in the context of a plea agreement. But I mean, is it really helpful to us? Look, he's guilty. I heard him in open court. I mean, Judge Hippler had to ask him these ugly questions. And at one point, for example, when he asked for each child, starting with Maddie, it was something to the effect of, I cannot convict you of a crime you didn't do, so I need you to confirm you did this. Did you stab, this child to death? And he answered, yes, I did. Or words very close to that. I mean, that was a profound moment. He's admitting to it. There's no question. He did it. End of story. That's the legal end of the story. I don't think we need to know, again, all the details about how exactly he did it, where the knife is, how many wounds were inflicted and so forth. I just don't think that's at least from my point of view, from a victim impact point of view, a victim recovery point of view, it's really not helpful. I understand why it's, prurient interests and other, people who have, are titillated by this kind of stuff, why they want to know all these little details. I get that. But I would ask them to think about the victims and look at it from a victim's rights standpoint and really think, is it really worth digging all this out?
Hey, Leander, that leads me to this question, which is, what's your background? Because I feel it's more therapist than attorney. So where did you get all of that?
Well, I have maybe a quirky background because I graduated, from undergrad from University of Santa Clara Jesuit School. I ended up teaching in France for a couple of years, and then wandered out to the West Coast where I worked up in Alaska, and I was a commercial fisherman up there in Washington. And, you think, well, what's the relevance of all that to what I do today? Well, the relevance is I had a lot of exposure to a lot of people in a lot of different contexts. I often joke up in Alaska, I fish with cons, not these are guys on the land. So I was exposed to a lot of human conditions and human experiences. And I think also being brought up by wonderful parents, and particularly my father, who was an attorney, who taught me a sense of empathy and care for people. That all that combined, I suppose, to orient me toward, first of all, only representing causes I believed in. Even back when I started as a older law student and became an attorney 30 years ago, I represented people and causes even if I couldn't afford to represent them. I represented what I believed in, and the causes I believed in, the people I believed in, and that's been great because that really has helped me. But I struggle to answer your question directly because I'm not very good at psychoanalyzing myself, but I have come to a place early in my practice. I came to a place where I represent primarily individuals. I represent people who have been harmed, and I just maybe have a natural empathy, and I early on recognized that the law can play a role in the healing process. Different attorneys approach it differently. You'll hear attorneys that say, "I'm a hired gun, pay me enough, I'll do whatever you ask." I've had a lot of, companies and others over the years want to hire me and pay me a lot of money, but I didn't believe in the cause and I didn't believe in what they're doing, so I didn't do it. And that helped me to maintain my center, and also helped me to maintain the criteria that I need to believe that I'm really helping an individual recover their life. So
I always ask people when I do interviews, what made you, how did you get your DNA? And it sounds like your dad was very important to you, and that you're taking what your dad gave you and using it to help people. Let me ask you this with regard to, before we ask you the final question about what the parents obviously want you to say to remember Maddie. When my husband and I have been at CrimeCon a number of times, and we've talked a number of times to the Petito family, which were also victims. Different case in the sense of no trial, but their empowerment that they have done for their loss. It seems to me to be so great that they're so empowered. They started a foundation. They wanted to talk just like you want to talk to victims' family. Have you seen like a change in your victim, a change in the family in terms of being empowered? Do they feel they have this empowerment? Can they take this empowerment, with Maddie's face and go forward? And how long before they're out to talk to the public again? Because I think it's so important that people see they can be empowered when they're victims.
Yeah, no, I'll answer that directly because I really have seen a transformation, and I can only hope that I've furthered that transformation. As an example, we have, you saw Scott give his victim impact statement on behalf for him and Karen. I'll just read you this one snippet that really hit me hard. He said, "All parents dream of their children accomplishing more than them. We realized this dream. All we had not become, she was becoming. Karen and I are ordinary people, but we lived extraordinary lives because we had Maddie." I can tell you that 6 months ago, even maybe 4 months ago, Scott could not have read these words in a victim impact statement. He could not have got up in court and read it. He was courageous on his part, and he did it. And I think to me that crystallizes the transformation I've seen in him, because at the early victim stage, people are almost vacant. They're struggling to process something that is impossible to process in a lot of ways, and so I've seen a tremendous change in them from the beginning to now. And for Karen, the foundation that she started, and that is helping children with scholarships and in their education, has really been a help. So the short answer then is yes, there's been a tremendous empowerment on their part, a tremendous change, but it's continuing because now we go into this phase where, all the gag orders lifted, other things are coming out in the press. We can't stop that. We're going to have to deal with it. And so my job's not done, and we'll continue to work them toward, as I say, becoming thrivers in life and moving on.
Hey, before we get some of your final thoughts on Maddie, I want to promote, the Made with Kindness Foundation. You mentioned the scholarships. That's one of the things folks can help by contributing. But you also have education, and some of that I noticed included safety. So is there a targeted effort to make folks, self-aware and keep horrible things from happening to them when they're off at school? And what's that part of the program?
Yeah, that's one of the prongs. I mean, look at what happened here. I mean, one of the safest places in the world is Moscow, Idaho. I went to law school there. I left that out. I did graduate from the University of Idaho, which was a lovely time because I wasn't on a boat in the middle of a storm in Alaska. It was nice to be on the ground for once. But it's a really pristine area. It's largely rural. It's a wonderful campus, and these kids went there, and this horrible thing happened. And it shows that even in that context, we need to be self-aware, and we need to teach kids self-awareness. So that is part of it, to encourage and promote that. It's in a way sad we have to, but this case is an example of why your kids really need to be self-aware and take reasonable precautions when they go away to school.
Huh, I tell you, it gave us a lot to think about, and the families, just their path forward, the loss of the child, the trauma, and to have you help them. You can see our viewers just love you. They love you, that you're there for them, and all. And I hope we haven't been part of that dark media that you were talking about, because
No,
we
Yeah,
really
if I-
wanted to get the word out.
Yeah, if I could make this last pitch, and I said it after their statement to the press, the young attorneys out there are looking for purpose and an honorable practice and extremely needed practice. I encourage all young attorneys to consider being crime victim attorneys to help crime victims. There aren't enough of us around, partly because, frankly, in a lot of ways, there's not much money in it, and I'm doing this pro bono. But there's a real need, and I'd encourage them to do that. We don't have enough of us. The other folks, as you saw, the roommates and others in this case, I'm sad they didn't have someone helping them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would Maddie's parents want us to know about her?
Oh my gosh! I mean, you can look at their impact statements that she was a bright, promising, lovely girl. She was a bit unusual as a teenager because she loved to spend time with her families, not so much out with her friends. She was such a loving, caring person. It truly was, and they want her memory to be out there for people to think about and to honor her when it comes to Maddie. And they live her legacy on with a foundation, with reaching out in their own way to other parents who are suffering similar tragedies. They're doing that on a daily basis.
That's wonderful. I mean, that's wonderful. I mean, wow. All I can say is wow. I mean, I really have no profound comments except for wow.
So, Leander James, we appreciate your time, your role. I think you're doing both the attorneys proud and, the therapist proud as well. I think that's such an important role that you play, and it's a unique role, and you're the perfect fit. So we appreciate you being out front and helping this family.
Right. You're doing the Mogen family proud, and you're doing your dad proud.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I'm humbled by the experience, so thank you.